Hey everyone, Mr. Weinland here. We've got Chapter 8, Political Geography. Going to get this done, get through it, so that way you guys can work on other things. But let's go over some of the questions. You can pause to write these down. We've got what is political geography? 2, what is a state? 3, what is the difference between a nation and a nation state? What is a multi-state nation? What is capitalism? What is devolution, and what is a boundary? So we're going to talk about those things real quick. It's not going to take too long, hopefully not, as the other one was 42 minutes long. But we're going to kind of go into how political organizations are created, or states and nations are created. Political geography, we have to start here. Political geography is another way of saying political organization of the world. We're talking about dealing with how is the world organized and how are groups organized into different like organizations, countries, states, or nations. And pretty much really what a state is a politically organized territory with a permanent population and defined territory and government. So basically we know like this group is here. There's a boundary outlining this group's area, their piece of land, what's in their territory, and the government that overlooks everything. So that's really what a state is. Another way of saying state is country. And I know you're like, well, Mr. Weinland, United States of America is a country, and then like states, like, are you saying that like the states in America are their own little countries? Yes and no. If you look at it, all 50 states in our country, in the United States, they kind of function like a little country. You're kind of seeing that play out right now with the coronavirus because the federal government makes up the United States. Like the United States is the federal government. Every state united is the federal government. And so the federal government overlooks everybody in those states. However, the federal government can't just go into each individual state and just be all like, yeah, we're going to take over and do this. Yeah, we're going to do that. No, they can't do that. There's certain laws where they can step in and say, yeah, you can't be smoking marijuana. Or, yeah, you can't do your taxes that way. Um, or they're saying we have federal taxes, we have state taxes, and they can step in and say somebody who lives in Oklahoma, you have to live under the same tax law as somebody in Georgia, Florida, as far as federal government goes. But there's still certain laws that they can't violate, and there's state law. And so we have that issue, and we have that thing that goes on. Like, I mean, let's go back on the issue of marijuana. Well, this is one of the complicated things that's going on. Federal government-wise, marijuana is still legal. However, in many different states, you have different forms of marijuana. You have medical marijuana, and you also have the ability to, oh gosh, what's it called, to smoke marijuana because you're legalized marijuana. So or recreational marijuana. I can't remember the proper term right now. Gosh, it's like stumping me. But anyway, the federal government is still saying like it's illegal. But like in Colorado, where you can go buy marijuana and smoke it, the state employee, the state trooper there, or the police officers have to follow within the state guidelines because they're not being employed by the federal government. Technically, yes, they're supposed to hold certain federal government laws, but to an extent, their boss is technically the governor. It's not the president of the United States because they're getting paid by the state government. So when the state government says this person can have this certain amount of marijuana, they can smoke it here, they can smoke it there, that's how the troopers are supposed to follow the law. So it's a bit tricky, it's a bit complicated. But we see territories arise all the way back to Europe, dealing with territorially, how to protect a territory. Today, we have, as far as territories go, we have around the world around 200 different territories, over 200 territories plus slash governments, plus slash countries. So the Olympics, here's the tricky thing. It's roughly just a little bit over 200 countries, but the Olympics recognizes a little over, I think, 240 or 260 different territories and slash countries, because there are still a lot of territories out there that are owned by other countries or controlled by other countries. But for example, by the United States, we control Puerto Rico. And so Puerto Rico, though, can compete as its own little entity or territory in the Olympics if it qualifies for certain sports, but it's still a part of the United States. So we have to kind of look at that and look at it differently. Under international law, states are sovereign and they have the right to defend their territorial integrity. So basically, we have the UN, United Nations, that recognizes different states or countries. And so every country and state has the ability to protect its country, but it has to be recognized as a sovereign nation. Everybody has to recognize that, because if they don't recognize it as a sovereign nation, then their acts defending, even if they're thinking they're defending their land, are almost a sign of act of war. So it is a bit of a tricky issue, and something that we have to see is it can be troubling. It looks like mostly throughout the world, we see that just about every country here has some form of independence, but there's still certain territories you can see here in South America, Africa, and even Greenland that are a part of different countries. Like Greenland, even though technically it's kind of its own little country, it's still a part of, I believe, Denmark. So um, so here, modern state idea, we see that a lot of the world that we see today, the countries you see today, formed about over 400 to 500 years ago. We see Europe has kind of started to develop a more modern system, kind of got away from kingdoms, kind of more into building governments that were more stable. This is all because of mercantilism, because of the accumulation of products and wealth. This caused plunder, colonization, protection of home industries, foreign markets. So basically, eventually, the European countries realized we got to protect our own little entities and resources. In order to do that, we have to reestablish our countries. And that's where we see a little bit more of the modern system, a little bit more form of government. Even going back to the Peace of Westphalia, negotiated in the 30 Years' War throughout Europe, we see that the form of territory society was formed in this time. We see nation. A nation is a culturally defined term of a few people agree on exactly what it means. We see that during this time, as Europe is reforming and reorganizing and creating its own form of people, we see the term nation come up. And nation is basically is referring to a certain type of people who share the same religion, same language, ethnicity, history. And so this term is bringing a group of people together on this shared culture, and kind of in this one little area or pockets of areas around the country. All nations are ultimately mixtures of different peoples. This is true. A nation is identified by its own membership. Therefore, we cannot simply define a nation as the people within a territory. So we have to understand that, like, nation sometimes isn't referring to everybody in the country. A nation is mostly referring to a specific type of person. So, like, for example, sports. This is the best thing to understand this. In the country of America, yeah, we're all Americans, but we all kind of root on different pockets of around the United States, roots on different sports teams. Sometimes they're local, sometimes they're statewide. Sometimes we're rooting for a team that's across the other half of the country. For example, I'm from Oklahoma. I know that there's a lot of Dallas Cowboy fans here in Oklahoma. We're not from Texas. I'm not from Texas. I was never born in Texas. I'm an Oklahoman. So I kind of felt like I had the right to choose my team that I wanted to root for. Naturally, I probably should have gone more towards Kansas City. I love Kansas City. Don't get me wrong. It's a great city. I love the Chiefs as well. I like watching their games. I like them right now. But my team, going all the way back to when I was a kid, is New England Patriots. But I'm a part of the Patriots Nation to a certain degree. Same like with Red Sox Nation. Red Sox Nation is not just in Boston. It's not just in Massachusetts. It's everywhere. There's a lot of Red Sox fans everywhere, and I'm a Red Sox fan. So nation can sometimes be not within a specific place, but everywhere. A nation state is a politically organized area in which a nation and state occupy the same space. So basically, this is where we start to see where the people of that nation occupy that country. The goal of creating a nation state dates back to the French Revolution with democracy, trying to bring democracy into that country. So when people have a strong sense of nationalism and have a loyalty to a belief in the nation itself, that's when we see mostly nation state. This kind of happens with the United States as well. We're Americans. A state is, in contrast, seeks to promote sense of nationhood and coincides with its own boundaries. So kind of get a sense of what to expect from its citizens in certain parts of its country. We have multinational states. So nearly every state in the world is a multinational state, a state with more than one nation inside of its borders. And that's one of us. We're United States. We have, people from different cultures, different ethnicities, speak different languages, all a part of the United States. People from Europe, people from Central America, people from South America, people from different parts of North America, you name it. And we have a lot of that. Then you have multi-state nations. Nation stretches across the borders, across the states. This can happen through time. We also have stateless nations. The Kurds have been fighting for their own little nation for years throughout parts of Iran here, Iraq, Syria, Turkey. The Kurds, they're a polarizing group. They're not really well liked in many parts of Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, but they are a large group, and you can see where they live, where they are mostly in these regions, especially the West Iran, northern Iraq, and parts of Syria and Turkey. The Turkish people, or at least the government, does not like the Kurds. And in Syria, the Kurds, have been played a big part in the war of Afghanistan, and helping to help in that process. We also see that they also helped with what's going on with the Syrian war. The Kurds helped with the Iraq war, not the excuse me, my apologies, not the Afghanistan war, but they definitely helped with the Syrian war and taking down ISIS. But then when we pulled troops out of Syria, that opened the door for Turkey, who is now trying to push the Kurds out of Turkey and into certain parts of Iran, Iraq, and Syria, which is causing a whole lot of problems. But we do see that a lot of these nation states, these modelings, and I'll go all the way back to colonialism when we see that European nations are trying to create their own little powers, their own little empires, and this is causing them to go into different spaces and mark their territory, mostly to do this to build the world economy up, to help build their resources up, and grow their countries. And we see that colonial influence definitely spread throughout much of the world. You could see even in North America, United States, Canada, Great Britain colonized this world. Mexico, all the way down to this part of South America, is Spain. Here, Portugal got Brazil and certain parts of Africa. Then you see also the Italians got certain parts of the world, and as well. And this caused a lot of conflict, a lot of problems, but this is kind of how we build our world economy up. We see that capitalism is building up political power. The idea of colonizing to build a wealth, to figure out how to expand the world economy, gain new resources, looking for gold, silver, new sorts of traded goods was a way to colonize the world. We see more of a construction of a capitalistic world in our economy, where we start to see a view of the world in terms of world states and what they offer, and how they provide to the world economy. So here's your definition for capitalism. So here are three basic tenets of the world systems theory as Manuel Wallerstein defines them. The world economy has one market. This is number one, has one world market, a global division of labor. Capitalism is in the world of economy of individual corporations. States produce goods, services, are exchanged for profit. The idea of making a good and creating a good and selling it for profit is the way to go. This is what developed back in 1450, and then eventually Adam Smith wrote about this as well. We see commodification is the process of placing a price on a good or an idea, buying, selling, trading. This idea of how much something is worth, mercantilism. How much are you going to be able to trade me for this item, or how much do you think this item is worth? And that's a big deal. Then we see number two, although the world has multiple states, almost everything takes place within the context of the world economy. That is true. We're seeing it play out now. When it comes to things like the coronavirus, shutting down cities and causing people to stay in the homes, it's going to affect the world economy. Even here in America, we depend on certain parts of the world for goods, like China. For an example, we tried to prepare for the coronavirus here, and we were a little bit too late because by the time we started trying to order masks and stuff, China was already shut down. They couldn't make the mask for us in time. So it is a big part of our country, and that goes all the way back to colonialism. Of certain states depend on others for money. And number three, the world economy has a three-tier structure. Core is where most likely you find higher levels of education, higher salaries. You see that a lot of these individuals are going to control certain aspects of the economy. Periphery, process associated with more marginal position of the world economy. So the help the core get certain jobs done, and then semi-periphery, places where the core and the periphery process both are occurring. So where you see is that you're seeing on the outskirts, different factories, resources are being shipped to these areas in order to help build the economy up. We do see that the major concerns with world systems overemphasize economic factors and political development. We have a lot of politics in our economy. When one country does something, it can cause ripple effect to others. Look at what's happened to China, them dealing with the coronavirus. Because they had to deal with the coronavirus, they couldn't help anybody, ship any goods or make any goods because of the problems they were dealing with. And the same thing with wars. When things like that happen, it definitely affects everybody. It's a domino effect. Very state centric. We do have a lot of states that focus more on themselves and not so much on the outskirts, and that sometimes can affect the ability to share goods, resources, information. So that can be very problematic and does not fully account for how places move from one category to another. We don't get all the data. We've gotten better. Data's gotten better, but we still lack the ability of transparency and working together. We're going to kind of move on and go to how do states spatially organize their government. So this is where we're kind of getting into boundaries and stuff, like how does the United States form its own little boundary. Political geographer Richard Hawthorne described the forces within the state that unify the people as a centripetal and the forces that divide them as centrifugal. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. Whether a state continues to exist depends on the balance between the two. How, the forces that are going to keep things moving, unifying, and then the centrifugal who are going to eventually hurt countries and the ability to get things done. This is something we're kind of dealing with America right now. We're dealing with some issues of, unification issues of bringing each other together and figuring out what is the right method to protect ourselves from this coronavirus. And the other aspect that we're dealing with is division, because certain states think that there should be an extreme version of how to fight this, while others not so much. And this is causing some problems. So unitary governments or centralized states, more administrative framework designed to ensure the central government's authority over all the states. So there's pretty much like in China, like this is the government, like we control everything. In a strong federal system, the regions have much control over the government policies and funds. In a weak federal system, the central government retains the significant measure of power. We have more of a federal system in America. It's not too weak, but it really, what determines a weak federal institution is the leadership within it. And so if you do not build it up to be strong, then you're not going to be strong enough. But if you have a bureaucracy that's strong enough, organized, well led, then you're going to see a much stronger federal system. Because in our government, yes, we have a federal government that looks after all of the United States of America, but we also have state governments. And those state institutions sometimes conflict with the federal. But if the federal is strong enough and well led, it can kind of tell what the states what to do. But if it doesn't know what to do, or doesn't have the ability to do anything, or enough, then the states can kind of push the federal government back and say, fine, if you're not going to be able to do anything, we're going to step in and do this. And we're seeing a little bit of this happen right now with coronavirus. We're depending more on our state governors than we are right now on the presidency. So we're seeing this happening in many different areas around the world, that certain local governments and statewide governments are having to kind of take more control of this thing, because the procedures and policies and things that are coming down from the higher ups is taking too much time. It's not fast enough. And so we do see that. Devolution, here's the definition of devolution: the movement of power from the central government to the regional governments within a state. Sometimes devolution is achieved by reworking construction of federal systems, like reorganizing the government, the power, and redoing certain things within the government. Electoral geography, we see this happening as far as how do we elect our officials. We do see that electoral geographers are always examining the world. How do voting districts work? How does the voting system work? How do individuals get voted into office? There's reappointment, process by which districts are moved according to the population shifts to each district has about the same number of people. So we see this happening a lot with the U.S. Congress. When the population goes down in one state, and another state goes up, then we see seat shifts. So this happened in Oklahoma. We had 6 U.S. representatives. Our population went down. It went up in another state. We lost that seat. So now we only have 5, and we still only have 5. Gerrymandering, electoral redistricting in order to gain a political advantage. You see this happening with Democrats and Republicans all over the world, or over the states, and states, not world, excuse me. But they're always trying to find the edge of where can we get more votes in certain districts. Here we go. Now we get into the boundaries. A boundary is between states and its actual vertical plane that cuts through the rocks below, called the subsoil, and airspace above, dividing one state from another. Then there's the vertical plane. It intersects the Earth's surface on the land or at the sea. It does it form the line we see on the ground. So you can see is that a boundary is not just on the land, it's also up in the air, the airspace, and also down below. So you have this farmer here with a well or some sort of mining. He can only go so far in his land. He cannot go into somebody else's land. There's a boundary here that will tell him how far he can dig underneath and where. Establishing boundaries, it just kind of depends on how we defined it. Sometimes it's by a treaty, sometimes it's by the landscape, sometimes it's by latitude, longitude. So we have to do this in different ways. This is why we have cartographers or mappers who come out and map out these lines. We also have demarcation, their boundaries like pillars, fences, walls, to be visible enough to see the boundary put in place to know where our land begins and the other person's ends. Geometric boundaries. We have geometric boundaries. They're drawn. We have grid systems based on longitude, latitude. Physical, political boundaries. So determining what exactly, based on the landscape, natural landscape dictates our land, their land. Sometimes it'd be like a crevice or a mountain range, a river, like the Red River separates Texas and Oklahoma. Definitional boundaries, disputes over the legal language of a boundary. Locational boundary disputes, depending on where exactly the location. Operational boundary, how neighbors share an area or function. And then allocation boundaries, dispute basically over rights, like rights to oil and water and things like that. So geopolitics, they've been studying these things going all the way back to the early 19th and 20th century with the German and British schools, trying to determine certain ways to separate certain countries and what they own and what they don't own. So this has gone on for many years. We've had different orders, world orders form, especially in the Cold War. We had Soviet versus the West Alliance, New World Order, which was created by the Bush administration, H.W. Bush, to kind of bring all the nations together. And we've seen over the years us try to build organizations up like the League of Nations or to the United Nations to help kind of bring these countries together and ultimately be on a good level to where we don't go into war. So it just comes down to really the leaders and the things they establish in order to protect the countries that they live in. But that's going to pretty much do it for Chapter 8. That's all we got on the lesson. We only have one more lesson. That's Chapter 11, so be looking out for that video. If you need to email me, you can email me at weinlandp@mannford.k12.ok.us. I'm going to say that again, weinlandp@mannford.k12.ok.us. So just be sure to email me if you have any questions. All right, I'll see you guys next time.